in our admin console, except you can't execute anything. Um, so yeah, let's. So one of the big things that we changed this week. So we've been ingesting all the data here, at least for the last I want to say 3 weeks or so. Um, and it's been working out well for us, but we haven't actually like checked that all of the data, is actually the way that we want it. So we had some work this sprint to actually get that done. And so we've written some automated checks in order to make sure that data as ingested is as expected or as close to as expected as we possibly can through our queries. Um, so you can see the results of one of them here. Actually, just ran this because all of our compute runs on Spot instances. So our compute can be a little bit unreliable. So sometimes you'll have to rerun some of these things. But there'll be settings in here, for us on our side, guys, that once things are more automated, those will just retry themselves. So that way, if the Spot instance gets killed, it'll try again and then just create a new one. But yeah, so as you can see here, this one does a traces check. So the way that this works is, so we have 3 different types of checks right now. And actually, I can show you in our beautiful repository here. So we have 3 different types of checks, and those checks are for the blocks, transactions, and traces. So those are written into our Dagster, which is OSO Dagster. So as you can see here, these are all part of the Goldsky integration that we have. So they're all in this checks file. So they're written as these functions that you can add to a given Goldsky asset. So and then that will generate different checks based on some input that you give it. But this one will actually, yeah. So we have the traces check, which checks for every transaction. So it joins against the transaction table. So this is dependent on the transaction table also passing its tests. But through some sliding window, so I give it every 5 days, it ensures that every transaction hash in the transactions table also has a matching trace available to it. It ignores everything that is happening today because we might still have incomplete data. So we give it like 24 hours to keep that rolling window. But yeah, so that I can show you here. And then the part of the result actually from this is it gives you some metadata on whether it's missing any transactions. So we can actually see this here. So over time, as we run this more and more, you'll actually see if this ever goes above 0, right? We're missing some transaction hashes, and we should probably look into it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so the same things happen here for transactions. So we can check the checks. You can go over. So every time you want to check an asset and whether or not it's like healthy, just go to where that transaction is or where that asset is. So as you can see here, actually we tried running, but something failed. So we'll need to run that again for the traces. But it also right before that it properly materialized the transactions. So we can check that it properly ran, and then also the check result was the green check mark. So everything on this specific asset is totally good. So same thing can be said for blocks. Yeah. So this is just in general how we know if things are working. So
Yeah, quick question.
Yeah.
So you're saying this happens on a sliding window, right?
Yeah.
Is there any way to trigger checks in the past? Because if it takes
Yes,
longer
there
than
is a
than 2
way to
weeks
trigger
to fix
checks in the
things.
past. So It's not yet exposed as a run here. That is something that I probably should just make an issue for this. I was doing that during debugging, and I created a little script. Hold on, wait, it's not anywhere. Let's see, it's on my branch. Let me push this one up really quick. But yeah, so you can run them. It just it needed a lot more like contextual data, so I needed to generate a few things in order to make that work. So
Like, would
it's
this be a
also why.
JavaScript check in the future, or would this be like an ad hoc Python script that we would run?
I would think that it would be. I would want to make it like a job that you can run here. So okay, let's go back to the
Oh, that'd
admin
be
panel really
cool.
quick. Yeah.
Yeah, because like
So
my
there's
thought
a
process here is that like most of the stuff that we're worried about right now is full backlog or backfills, right? So like, how
correct.
would I
Yes.
know if the full backfill is good?
Yeah, so if we want to know the full backfill, yeah, let me actually, I did push up this branch. Yeah, okay. Debugging it. Nope, did I not? Oh, ah. Wrong. Give me a second. Perfect. I never push this branch up. All right. So, just a second. I will see this, and then we can look at this. Oops. So if you go to the warehouse right now, and I think I will commit this tool, but for now, I made this as just a testing thing. But essentially, it sets up essentially a test environment to run the check because it needed some additional. The check right now is generally um, it just needed some additional context information to run. It was a bit annoying. So in the easiest and fastest thing for me to do during debugging was to just run all of these manually. That being said, yeah, I think what I'll do, and I'll make a new issue for this, but we should expose like the full check as an actual job that you can run with metadata output. So, but yeah, you can you can see here, I'm calling all of the well, maybe you can't tell, but I'm calling all the checks based on which assets. So like optimism traces is the only thing uncommented right now, but it'll check from these. It'll grab all of the related checks to that specific asset and then execute every single one of those. So that's what this does right here.
Oh, this is
Also,
super
why?
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that it does it for the entire data set is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. It does it for the entire data set. So the thing that the one of the big changes that I made in this sprint was actually introducing the use of this tool called SQL Glot. So I need
Yeah.
to reorganize where some of these things are. But for now, I'm trying to get rid of anything that we do with Jinja in SQL. So I would hope to do this as well with our DBT and move us to SQL Mesh.
Yay.
But in general, like the
Okay.
scripting is it makes the scripting a little bit safer. I also actually included a lot of tests here to ensure that that is actually true. But it also allows us to target, not just like a BigQuery, but also like DuckDB for like local testing. So I actually am able to test all of these operations in a way that is uh, like it doesn't require a BigQuery connection, which is cool for especially for unit testing, right? But one of the things that we do, so if you look at the operations that we have here, oops. So for right now, what you can actually do, so you write just the query. So for the traces check, we just write a very simple query. But then I can run a transform on this, and as you can see, there's still Jinja in here because I still haven't been able to rip all of it out. Trying to do that in stages here. But the Jinja here is meant to be extremely simple. No conditional logic, just variable replacement. So one of the things that we can actually do is actually using our little CBT tool, which is now becoming this new thing. We can actually do a time constraint. And the time constraint will actually find every table that you, so based on the time column and the table name, it will ensure that that table is always time constrained. So for our BigQuery queries, they don't become expensive. So all it does, all the check does right now when it needs to call the entire thing is just not include the time constraint at all. So and this macro is SQL aware, so it will transform properly and it will always compile correct SQL, which is awesome actually.
Wait,
So
what does CBT stand for here?
oh, CBT was meant to be cheap DBT, but yeah, it was a silly name when I first wrote this thing. So the name of the tool will probably change at this point, but yeah, it was just a cheap build tool, basically, because it was very quick use. It was all I did initially was quickly map it to have BigQuery and Jinja support, and that was yeah. So basically everything we do with DBT, but with just those two things. But yeah, so adding new checks, I guess, is uh, huh. If we want to add new checks to things for Goldsky, there is a specific process for it. But for other stuff, there isn't right now. But I can go over that at the very least here, so we can take a look and keep opening new tabs. This is how I get into tab hell. Um, my brain. All right. So if you go to the assets, within OSO Daxter, this is where everything is currently defined. This needs to be cleaned up. We very much already know that. But right here, you can see that the checks are just passed into the Goldsky asset. So this is base blocks, so it has the blocks checks. This is the base transaction, has transaction checks, and some of the options here are, okay, well, we need to know the block database, because the transaction check does a join on the blocks database to ensure that for every block there are transactions. Now, obviously, in some of the instances, this won't actually work. So this does need to be updated a little bit, but that's also why the checks are written in a way that are more like warnings than they are like hard stop for everything at the moment. But like it won't prevent the rest of the pipeline from executing. It'll just warn us right now. But yeah, in the case for say like the Bedrock upgrade, that block does not have any transactions. So you know this kind of thing would obviously fail on those kinds of that specific instance.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, definitely
yeah.
these are the types of things that would be good to document for the sprint. Would be like, how do we want to organize this?
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, we can probably link to the Dagster docs on how to write a check and all of that, but like
Mm-hmm.
specifically how we want to organize our own Dagster config and how an outside contributor can add an asset, add a check, all
Yes.
that kind of
Yeah.
stuff would be great to have in your docs. So this is awesome. I think it's like a good place to start.
Yeah. Definitely needs a lot more. I think this file has become like 1,000, almost. Oh yeah, 500 lines. It's too much. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, we need to.
we'll
Yeah.
refactor it. So
Yeah.
then, do you mind also just like walking us through like, yeah, how somebody in the community can visualize the current status of the pipeline?
Yeah. So, okay. So, we're still working on getting everything. So we're moving everything from we were using GitHub Actions actually to do a lot of our a lot of our pipeline management, which is kind of a hammer where Dagster can be can be either a hammer or a scalpel, which is quite useful. Um, but yeah, so one of the best ways to see kind of where we are with everything is looking at the global asset lineage. Um, Now, like I said, we are still on the process of integrating everything properly. So some of these will look like they've never been materialized, but that's because they're being materialized elsewhere. But as you can see here, this one like has a green. That means that it's up to date. As of this one says it's up to date as of yesterday, but you can also see potentially maybe other information here. So what I would do if you're interested in a very specific thing is I would, because the global asset lineage is massive and probably will continue to grow massively. I would choose one of the assets like base blocks, check the lineage, and then you can go downstream, so you can see everything that it needs downstream and what the status of those things are. Like we can see, hey, the trace is screwed up. So there's something wrong here. So and we will re-execute that again, right? But yeah, or you can see the way like you can hit all and you can see everything that base is actually related to, which is a bit much. So you probably don't want to see that. But
Yeah,
like even going
this is
10
super
layers down
cool.
is kind of insane. So, but yeah,
So I know
I
in
would say
this
that this is the
sprint,
best way.
I know in this sprint we want to start reporting metadata results. Like, what are the types of
Yes.
things that we want to report? You know, when you click on one of these things and you see a yellow or you see a red, like, what are the types of things that we want to be able to
Yeah, that's a
present?
good question. I actually, yeah. So in other setups, like the GCS files, the metadata that I was recording that are like where we're just getting piped in GCS files that like update the entire database. I was updating what's the latest version of that. For the Gold Sky data, since that comes in as like incremental pieces of data. I'm not entirely certain yet. I think uh, probably the useful information is around, like the date range for that specific the previous pool.
Yeah,
Um, I think that probably makes the most sense because we do get that information as we're loading. So, and that would be useful at least for debugging purposes. I'm also writing an issue right now to potentially separate every materialization of a Gold Sky asset into a set of different partitions. It might actually help clean up kind of our view of things and also give a better understanding of the health of all of this information, of all of our data ingest. Excuse me.
yeah, this is cool. I know I was very skeptical of Daxter when you were first pushing for it, but I appreciate that you convinced me and actually did it
Yeah,
because
I
this
mean,
is
I'm very glad that pushed us this direction because it's very useful tool. So yeah.
yeah, it's totally a step in a better direction. So this is awesome. Thanks. Um, I guess yeah, really briefly, um, I could show how this shows up in the Google Analytics hub. Or is there anything else you want to show?
No, 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 that's it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I will take less than 2 minutes. I think what I want to show is pretty short. Um, so we're currently in the process of refactoring some of our docs. I think more of our contribution to the pipeline will be Daxter oriented. So that's one of the things we're working on. And then we're also working on like all the different ways that you can explore this data. And I think one of the things that is really cool about what we're doing is that, you know, everything on our everything in our pipeline is fully visible and fully queryable, and that is true for every model. So increasingly, we're going to start publishing more of these public data sets in the BigQuery Analytics Hub. So if you go to Getting Started now, there's actually a link to it. And if you click on this, we've created what we call a data exchange, and I think they call it an exchange because I think like there is also a world where there's private data sets and you can sell private data sets and whatnot. We're kind of using the tool purely just to share public data sets. So right now we have our entire OSO production data pipeline. We have this superchain data, which we're not quite ready to launch yet because we're still doing some quality checks and clean up there. But if you go into one of these, and we have the playground data, which is just a subset of the production data for testing and development purposes. If you go to any one of these, there's a listing page, which is really cool. You can subscribe, and when you click subscribe, you can subscribe it into your own Google project, which kind of like this is a live data set that we keep up to date. When you subscribe, we get to see like your usage of it. So
This is
we
awesome.
can manage. Yeah, exactly. We can manage the subscriptions. We can see everybody that's subscribed to our data set. This is way better than what we were doing before, which is just kind of like linking directly to the data set. There's also like, we also now will have the ability to take a look at usage data. So where is that? Usage metrics. So as people start subscribing to our data sets, we can click on a listing and we can see through the subscription what kind of jobs they're running, how much they're running things over time, and then also byte scanned. So this is actually kind of cool. Like we'll in the future be able to see basically how people are using our data sets. So I'll start making more listings over time. And you can see they're just directly linked to a particular BigQuery data set. Yeah, I think we'll have more to share about this, like when we clean up some of our docs. But just as like a little bit of a sneak preview, I think there's a world where you can query directly in BigQuery. Hopefully, I'll show you how to subscribe, I guess, to our data sets in that tutorial. I think we probably want to do something similar in the Python notebooks, which is kind of a tutorial that we already have. We should be able to fork, the data pipeline to create your own DBT pipelines from any of our intermediate models. And we want people to use tooling like best-in-class the data science tooling like Hex and Metabase or Tableau or whatever you like using. So that's kind of where things are going. And I think we just need better documentation on how to use any particular mark. Like, I don't think it's like particularly obvious to people right now just how powerful this event table is and what are all the things you can do with some of our, intermediate models. Carl, you and I should probably brainstorm on how to service that in the docs. But yeah, I think it's pretty powerful. Like in theory, it's all there in our reference documentation, but it's just like a little overwhelming maybe because like there's so many models in there and I'm not going to read the every single model and how it works, and not all of our models are documented, which is something we should work on. There's like no description right now on anything, so yeah, we should think about how we want to actually polish this up for the sprint, but pretty good.
Ray, did you change the font in the docs, or is that just how you have it configured locally?
I am currently on a Windows PC, which I'm not typically on, and the default font is just different. I didn't configure anything, if that's the truth.
You never know. Cool. Let me share a few things quickly. I'll just take screen. Great. Can you see? So one of the smaller things we did over the past couple weeks is actually a bit of refactoring on the Open Source Observer main page to include some new metrics. The same is true for the on-chain piece. I could show an example of that in a second. As it relates to Open Source Observer, though, we had a pretty big surge in activity over the past couple of weeks, mainly driven by Retrofunding 4 and projects signing up to add their artifacts to OSS directory. So we kind of crossed the 100 fork mark. We have now a number, I think 67 new contributors in the past couple months or so. You can actually see this as well over here. So a pretty big surge in terms of activity happening, and a lot of people sharing project info, which is what we want. We did improve some of the validators that allow you to make a pull request and ensure that it complies with the schema, and the artifacts listed are an EOA or a deployer or a contract, etc. So there's better logic now for checking all of that, which is cool if you're making a pull request. The other thing that I will share is a implementation of OpenRank. So last time we talked about that we now have Karma 3 data, which is coming in, and we have that as a source, and so we can actually build models on top of that. And we experimented with a couple different ideas over the past week or so, but one of the cool ones that we're implementing right now is basically taking the retrofunding for badge holders. So this is basically the wallet addresses of all of the badge holders in Optimism. And so we're basically grabbing those addresses and then looking up if they have a Farcaster ID associated with it. I think it's something like 70 of the 130 addresses have a Farcaster ID. And so with that, we are then seeding the Eigentrust algorithm by looking at those badge holders, looking at their 100 closest connections, and then building a web of trust from that, kind of the union of all of those individuals. So that becomes our set of trusted users. And then what we can do is actually look at what projects are most popular among that cohort of users. So here's the model. You could obviously play around with this, the addresses that you're using. You could play around with the strategy. You could play around with the size of the results that you want to get back. In this case, it's 100. And some people have many thousands of connections. But then, go ahead.
Can I ask a quick clarification question?
Yeah.
In the past, we've had discussions about like separating the notion of addresses and then users that kind of bind a bunch of addresses together. This kind of just bypasses all of that right now, right? Like we're not actually doing any kind of aggregation of activity across addresses by users who we believe to be the same user.
In this case, it goes back and forth. So it takes the addresses, then it gets the Farcaster IDs, then it expands to any other address that's associated with that Farcaster ID. So maybe this is your badge holder address, but then you have 10 other addresses associated with your Farcaster ID. All of those be brought in to the web of trust here. But then it kind of collapses back to a user. So even if you have 10 addresses and all 10 addresses were interacting with the same project, that wouldn't count as 10 users, it would count as one user.
Cool. Is it about time that we create like this, like a users v1 MART model then?
Yeah, I think we might actually have a users v1, but we should make a better one.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
And then how this shows up, this is very preliminary, so people who are watching don't read too much into this. We're still kicking the tires on the data, but you can actually see of the, I think it's like 5,000 or so users that came through this, what is their project rank. So this is the list of projects that have applied for retrofunding, and you can basically see where they are in terms of popularity among badge holders, or the web of trust around badge holders. That's it for me.
Go.
Well, yeah, I feel like we're on the precipice of something like, again, I think, Carl, like you and I should just sit down and think about the developer or user experience through our docs, but there's something really powerful about like the three things that we just showed is like, understanding the indexing from Dagster, you have the entire lineage graph, right? And then that's like data coming in, but that exact same lineage graph is available in models.opensource.observer, right? To help people understand like, okay, this is the schema of any particular model, and then you can take that and go straight to BigQuery and start like querying any particular stage of the pipeline and start contributing there. And there's something here that like isn't quite glued together yet, but like you can see it. It's like it's really powerful understanding the full lineage graph and be able to play it in any particular part of it.
Yeah, exactly. I think we are very, very close. This will get into sprint planning and stuff like that. I think, yeah, there's a few things that we can do just on the data side to make these operations less expensive for users. And then, as you said, like with the documentation, to show 5 or 6 examples of all the different ways you can do it.
Yeah, and from that perspective, like I feel like we're breaching new territory here. I'm curious if other people in the community have other examples of like open data pipelines that we can draw inspiration from. I've seen a lot of really cool things on the API side. That seems to be like, okay, hidden data pipeline, there's a good API, fine. And then there's like really cool source data that you can get on, public data exchanges, right? But like, and there's a bunch of those as well. But like this really dynamic, evolving, fluid, like very visible data pipeline thing that we're doing that's like actively transforming the data on a daily basis, and anybody can get their fingers into any part of it. Like, I don't know, I would love to see if there's somebody else that's done this before, so that we can learn from them. And if not, like what we're building here is like pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't come across anything like it.
Cool. Any other questions?
All right. Maybe
All
we
right,
should
if not,
close it
we can
out.
wrap up.
Santiago,
Cool.
Matt, good
Thanks.
to see you. Hope you're all
Yeah,
well.
thanks for
If you
joining.
have some ideas, feel free to drop a note.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Good to hear from you. See you.
Yeah, definitely.